Try imagining someone pulling out a smartphone in 2050. Seriously. Imagine you're sitting in a cafe, and somebody reaches into their pocket, takes out a rectangular piece of glass, and starts tapping on it. People would stare. Not because the phone is impressive. Because it looks ancient. By 2050, phones are gone. Not upgraded, not replaced. Gone. A few decades ago, researchers at Stanford's Bow Lab were already building electronic skin that could stretch and move with the body. Harvard was experimenting with biodigital inks. Tokyo Tech was developing OLED displays thin enough to sit directly on human skin. Those projects eventually became the same thing. Today, when I get a message, nothing vibrates in my pocket. My hand just lights up. A notification appears across my skin. A video opens on my forearm. A call pops up on the back of my hand. And after a while, you stop noticing how crazy that is. What people care about now isn't the hardware. It's the design. Some people cover their arms with animated digital tattoos. Some have glowing artwork that changes throughout the day. Others sync their skin themes to their music, their mood, even their heartbeat. The phone industry didn't survive. Your body became the phone. But even after screens moved onto our skin, there was still one thing nobody had solved: sound. For over 100 years, listening to music worked the same way. A speaker vibrated. The air vibrated. Your ears picked it up. That was it. Then researchers at places like MIT Media Lab started asking a completely different question. What if music never had to travel through the air at all? What if you could send it straight to the brain? Back then, it sounded ridiculous. Today, it's normal. Most people in 2050 don't wear headphones. In fact, if you look around a train station, almost nobody appears to be listening to anything. No earbuds, no AirPods, no giant headphones. And yet millions of people are listening to music. The device is usually hidden somewhere on the body, sometimes behind the neck, sometimes inside jewelry, sometimes so small you can't even see it. Because it doesn't play sound. It creates the experience of sound. Right now, I'm standing in one of the busiest places on Earth. People talking. Announcements blasting overhead. Trains arriving every few seconds. The kind of place where you used to crank your headphones to maximum volume just to hear your own music. But none of that matters anymore. Because inside my head, there's a live concert happening. I can hear every instrument, every vocal layer, every tiny detail. And somehow it's clearer than listening in a silent room. The system takes a music file and converts it into neural signals designed specifically for the auditory system. No speakers, no sound waves, no air. The music never leaves the device. It appears directly inside your mind. And maybe the strangest part is what happened to hearing loss. For most of human history, damaged hearing meant losing access to sound. Not anymore. Many people whose natural hearing has deteriorated still experience music perfectly because these systems simply route around the damaged parts. The signal takes a different path, and once that happened, headphones became optional. Speakers became optional. Even ears became a little bit optional. For the first time in history, entertainment stopped traveling through the world around us and started traveling directly into the brain. But if music no longer needs speakers, there's an obvious question. Why do we still have TVs? Why do we still dedicate an entire wall of our house to a giant black rectangle? Back in the 2020s, companies like Lightfield Lab, Apple's secret display teams, and researchers at the University of Tokyo were already working on something that sounded impossible. A screen that wasn't actually a screen. And now, in 2050, that's exactly what happened. Look around a modern living room. You won't find an 85-inch TV. You won't find a projector. You won't even find a wall designed for entertainment. Instead, you'll see a small box sitting quietly on a table. That's it. No bigger than a coffee mug. And somehow, that tiny box can create a movie screen larger than anything people owned 30 years ago. When it turns on, millions of light rays are projected into space with ridiculous precision. And suddenly, a movie appears in midair. Not on a wall, not on glass, not on a display, just floating there. The first time you see it, your brain doesn't know what to do. Because it doesn't look like a hologram from old science fiction movies. Those holograms always looked fake, transparent, ghost-like. This doesn't. Imagine a movie character standing in the middle of your living room. You walk to the left. You see their left side. You walk behind them. You see their back. You crouch down. You see them from below, just like a real object. Because the image actually has depth. That's the whole point of light field technology. The device isn't showing you a flat picture. It's recreating the way light would naturally bounce off a physical object. Which means every person in the room can look from a different angle and see something slightly different. Exactly the way reality works. And honestly, once you've watched movies this way for a few years, old televisions start feeling weird. Why would anyone watch a giant flat rectangle when the entire room can become the screen? And that's when something unexpected happened. People stopped designing homes around technology. Think about how much space entertainment used to consume. TVs, monitors, projectors, speakers, gaming setups. Entire walls dedicated to electronics. All gone. Modern living rooms are almost empty now. A sofa, a table, maybe a plant. The technology has basically disappeared into the background. But here's the interesting part. Even this floating cinema still depends on a computer somewhere. A processor. A device doing all the calculations. And for decades, people assumed computers would keep getting smaller. Nobody expected them to almost vanish. If I asked you where your computer is right now, what would you point at? A laptop? A desktop? Maybe a tablet? In 2050, most people point at a necklace, or a button on their shirt, or a small crystal hanging around their neck. Because that's where the computer is. Years ago, researchers at Intel, IBM, and the University of Manchester were experimenting with neuromorphic chips and photonic computing systems. At the time, the machines filled laboratories. Today, the descendants of those systems fit inside wearable devices, and they power almost everything. Your entertainment, your communication, your personal AI, your digital world, all from something smaller than a watch. The weird thing is that you rarely think about it. Nobody talks about processor speeds anymore. Nobody argues about graphics cards. Nobody spends weekends building gaming PCs. That entire culture basically disappeared. Because computing stopped being a destination. It became infrastructure. The wearable core simply follows you everywhere. When you enter a room, it automatically connects to nearby devices. A wall becomes a display. A desk becomes a workstation. A floating holographic screen appears above the table. The experience follows the person, not the location. And maybe that's the biggest shift. In the old world, your technology lived inside your house. In 2050, your technology lives on your body. The house no longer contains the computer. You do. But even after computers shrank into something you could wear around your neck, there was still a problem. How do you actually control any of this? For decades, humans used keyboards, then touchscreens, then voice commands. But by the 2050s, even those started feeling slow. Researchers at Meta Reality Labs, smart fabric teams in China, and engineering groups in North Carolina spent years working on a different idea. What if your clothes could understand what your body was trying to do? Not after you move, before you move. Today, that's exactly how most interactive entertainment works. Your shirt, your sleeves, even your gloves are packed with microscopic sensors woven directly into the fabric. The moment a muscle activates, the system notices. Not the movement, the intention behind the movement. And that changes everything. Imagine playing a racing game, not with a controller, not with a steering wheel. You simply lean slightly to the left. The car turns. Lean right. The car responds instantly. Or imagine a shooter. You don't press a trigger. You just make the tiny muscle movement your hand would normally make before pulling one. The game understands what you're trying to do before the motion is even visible. At first it feels like magic. Then it becomes normal. The result is that gaming no longer looks like gaming used to. People aren't sitting motionless on a couch staring at a screen. They're moving, dodging, turning, running, stretching. Entire esports tournaments now look closer to athletic competitions than computer games. And once your clothing becomes a controller, something strange happens. The line between the physical world and the digital world starts disappearing. Because eventually, even the screen itself becomes unnecessary. Think about everything we've talked about so far. The phone disappeared. Headphones disappeared. TVs disappeared. Computers disappeared. Controllers disappeared. Controllers disappeared. But there was still one thing left: the screen. Every technology company spent decades trying to make screens bigger, then thinner, then foldable, then transparent. And eventually someone asked a different question: why have a screen at all? Years ago, companies like Mojo Vision and researchers at the University of Washington were already experimenting with smart contact lenses containing microscopic displays. The prototypes were primitive, tiny, limited, but the direction was obvious. And by 2050, the result is sitting directly on your eyes. Most people now wear contact lenses that are thinner than a human hair. You can't see them. Nobody around you knows you're wearing them. But the moment you blink in a specific pattern, an entire digital world appears. Not on a screen, not on a wall, directly in front of your vision. A movie screen larger than a cinema. A game environment covering an entire city block. A virtual concert floating above the street. And because the images are projected directly toward your eyes, they feel completely real. The digital layer doesn't replace reality. It sits on top of reality. Which means every person can experience a different version of the same world. Walk through a city in 2050, and this becomes obvious. One person is watching a football match while walking home. Another is playing a strategy game across the rooftops. Someone else has transformed the entire skyline into a cyberpunk city because they prefer the aesthetic. All while standing in exactly the same place. The physical world is shared. The visual world is personal. And maybe that's the biggest change of all. Entertainment is no longer something you open. It's no longer a destination. It's no longer a device. It's a layer that exists around you all the time. A layer you can turn on with a blink. And looking back, that's probably the strangest part of living in 2050. None of these technologies feel futuristic anymore. They're just normal. Just like smartphones once felt normal. Even though, from where you're sitting today, they probably sound completely insane. And maybe that's the biggest surprise about entertainment in 2050. The future wasn't about building bigger screens, better speakers, or more powerful devices. It was about making the devices disappear. The phone became your skin. The headphones became your nervous system. The screen became your eyes. And the computer became part of your body. Technology didn't leave our lives. It simply got closer than ever before. Thanks for watching. And if you're curious about what the rest of life looks like in 2050, from transportation and education to healthcare and artificial intelligence, make sure to subscribe, because we're just getting started.